This is the Exploring Astrology podcast, where we are discovering the connections between inner and outer space, distilling an essence that we can work with. And I'm your host, Adam Summer.
Something complete and whole, something timeless and spaceless and absolute.
Is what I now call the time wave.
No news, no pop culture. If you bring pop culture on the show, you're out. We're anti-pop culture. You're out. You're fired.
We can explore space together, both inner and outer, forever.
I wanted to know about stories from the place that are deepest to me. In a time where we are exposed to, endless opportunities for growth. What about depth? What about depth?
Why, hello there, friends. Welcome to another Exploring Astrology podcast. This one on the Jupiter-Uranus opposition entitled, as Martin Shaw was just saying, Endless Opportunities. And what about depth? So what we're going to do today is explore such inquiries into this problem of the West through the lens of Jupiter and Uranus, who seem to have a surprise gift for us the day after Christmas. Then again, 2 more times in 2017, one in March and one in September. This potential quantum leap in consciousness can also blow out the fuses, though, running way too much current through the system that's not ready for it. A premature awakening. A serpent that has run rampant in the nervous system like a sliced power line, dancing unpredictably in our bodies. It's dangerous business. So we're going to try to navigate that, to not go crazy, to not go bald, to not lose our bearings with such an electric axial alignment. And this opposition happens every 14 years, and it never seems to disappoint. One of my favorite chapters, actually, in Cosmos and Psyche is entitled Cycles of Creativity and Expansion. And it's Rick's thorough exploration through time with these alignments, both conjunction and opposition, that seem to spark revolution. Freeing Prometheus from that damn rock, taking the vision back from the great eagle, becoming it, skinwalking into it, seeing with, say, magical liver eyes, what is really true, and how to make the vision go viral. Jupiter and Uranus seems to conjure infectious memes, some good, some bad, some in between, planting them successfully in the collective imagination, altering the understanding we all have, or at least everyone that is touched by them. For example, Copernicus, his heliocentric model, related to one of these alignments, or when Kepler and Galileo simultaneously confirmed his ideas during one of these such alignments, or how Darwin finally comes out with his fermented theory of evolution, turning such an idea into an assumption these days. Is it really true? It's a successful meme. You have Freud's sexual theories about the psyche, the impossibility of quantum mechanics and theories, moon landings, the summer of love, the birth of the internet, the tearing down of the wall. The list, my friends, goes on and on and on. Every conjunction and opposition relates to what we're talking about, but the main focus of this show is going to be the opposition, which we're moving into on December 26th. It's exciting. And so today, how can we see it but so many different ways, but Westworld and virtual reality, the fear and transhumanism, smart drugs, terrible drugs, Trump, the capacity to flee wherever the heart may roam, and all these endless opportunities that can lift us off the ground into an entirely different dimension. But lots of it can be starving of good story, myth, context, ancestors, grief, and suffering. And so hopefully whatever the dimension this lifts us off, wherever it's pointing in our charts, however it's working its way in our minds, is not the same as what Martin calls a scatterling, or a heady monkey world traveler who doesn't know the first story about the ground upon which they walk. And that's most of us, my friends. Most of us. And I wonder how many of us live within 30 miles of where we came into this world, how we may or may not have an incredibly magical connection to that hillside, that river, knowing how to listen to the fairy tales of the old tree in the center of the forest. Not many of us, I imagine. It's a work in progress. It's something I'm constantly thinking about. But there's nothing more true than this place and stories of it, and your own thoughts and what is true, what resonates as that in your own mind. So with the endless possibilities, opportunities, which is a Jupiter idea, and all the questions which seemingly we have can be answered in one phrase, we ask Google or Siri, a Uranian idea, it's important then to question it all, to call in depth and bone marrow knowing with all we believe or think to be true about life. And when it comes down to memes, not the internet ones, like those memes, those silly ones, but the ideas, the quotations, the expressions of culturally accepted behaviors like politically correct culture, the social justice warriors, just to be aware. With religion, to question always the relationship they and those ideas have to universal truth, not the relative truth. And really know thyself. And for the good ones, that is the helpful memes, you know them when they come, because they light you up. They feel right in your body. Like one of my faves, we don't know enough to worry. So let's go on an adventure with Jupiter and Uranus, choosing just a few of these doors of opportunity to walk through and see what we find out about this thank the gods, old and new alignment. Perhaps discovering how to transcend all programming through metaphysical means. And before we do this exploration, got to talk a little bit of shop. So welcome to the show again. One way of supporting the show is going onto iTunes on your computer, in the store, in the podcast section, finding Exploring Astrology. There's also links on my website to this. And leaving a few stars, leaving a review. It does wonders for the podcast. And also, the main way of supporting the podcast is through Patreon. And go to patreon.com/exploringastrology, and you can choose what tier you would like to support this podcast and my writing and all that I do, and you get gifts. For every single tier, you get gifts. At the $1 tier, you're submitted to the Lunar Raffle, where you can win a reading with me. The $5 tier is the parlor that we do every month, like a Q&A where we all get together and just ask questions and get to know this content or everything that's happening in the sky. At a $10 tier, you get both the parlor and a class of the month. So the class that's going to happen this month actually is going to occur the 1st or the 2nd of January, but still is on the nodes of the moon. So just by contributing that $10 at that tier, you get to be a part of over 4 hours of classes a month. At the $50 level, all of that's included, but a mini reading every month with me. At the $100 level, a full reading with me with everything else included. So again, patreon.com, Exploring Astrology, and choose your support tier, I suppose. And thank you guys, I just want to say, for all the reviews you have given. There seems to be a few of them coming in, so thank you so much for doing that. And a bit here about learning astrology. The apprenticeship is on the horizon. We're going to start the second week of January. I think it's an amazing time to learn astrology. This Jupiter-Uranus opposition is well oiled for such a pursuit. And if you're listening and you were on the wait list, I did send out a blast email to kind of gather all of the for sures. So I think about half of you have already responded to that. If you are interested in doing the apprenticeship, which is going to be around 8 months from January until next fall, essentially. We'll see how it goes. Just email me. Let me know. cosmonosis@gmail.com. There's also a little page on my website, holstoheavens.com, that has a syllabus attached to it, so you can get an idea of what the class looks like. And if you have any specific questions for me, again, just email me about that. The parlor that I just mentioned is going to happen on the 18th, which is next Sunday, and then again the class is going to be on the 2nd on the nodes of the moon for all of you patrons listening. Also, holiday discounts are happening, 25% off all of my readings. To get that promo code, you can either email me or subscribe to my newsletter, and in that newsletter is that promo code. And finally, we're brought to you by Solar Fire, an astrology program. And embedded within the program is a guarantee of upgrading your storage capacity and memory around all things astrological. Can't think of a better Christmas gift to give yourself than to make a leap from astro.com to Solar Fire. In and of itself, I think it's a quantum leap of astrological information. And if information's power, can you imagine what the old wizards like Ptolemy and Ficino may have done with it? Probably just got frustrated with the Mac issue, I suppose. Just assuming they'd be Mac users. But anyway, if you want to get Solar Fire for yourself or a loved one for Christmas, use promo code SOMA in my store at holstoheavens.com and get 15% off of the program. And we're also brought to you by Liam's Chocolate Cococo. Go to drinkcococo.com and peruse. And by drinking this stuff, for basically every new meme that we allow in, a new gene sequence is created, which requires a strong heart, healthy blood, an inner world freed up of cancer growth. Well, in good chocolate, like Liam's Cococo, the main alkaloid that is present in it is theobromine, and it assists beautifully with such a process of the healthy heart and blood and fighting cancer. It also invites the cacao god into your life. Theo, or Thea. Wait, that's my cat's name. Still, through that invitation, he or she can unlock some of that junk DNA maybe inside of you. It's both the drink of Jupiter and Uranus as well. My favorite is the Global Warrior. It's amazing. So go to drinkcococo.com, use promo code SOMA to get 10% off any of Liam's products. So let's get into it, shall we? Okay, the nature of the Jupiter-Uranus cycle. I think it's a good place to begin. And let's take a little peek into Cosmos and Psyche, Rick Tarnas' amazing book on planetary cycles, and just get a very basic idea of what's going on here. He writes, when Jupiter and a second planet enter into cyclical alignment, the coinciding events suggest Jupiter's archetypal influence to be of magnifying and supporting the second planetary archetype with an expansive, elevating quality, crowning it, as it were, granting it success, honoring it, bringing it to fruition, mediating its positive unfolding, its growth, its fulfillment, its enrichment, its cultural ascension, with a definite potential for excess and inflation. This idea of crowning what? Well, Uranus. It's Jupiter in Libra opposing Uranus in Aries. And so the crowning occurs to Uranus. In a way, getting Prometheus back on that eagle, becoming the eagle, offering a more enlivening view of our lives, of what's going on in our minds, giving chance for revolution and the change we've all been looking for. And opposition is fulfillment in a sense. It's a fruition of the cycle. And we'll talk about all of like when this began. For example, we'll look at that and kind of contemplate it. But for now, let's just focus on what is the nature of Jupiter and Uranus as an archetypal pair. I would say it's a breakaway into a breakthrough. It's something which gives rise to the potential of reawakening divine consciousness. There's a lot of yes involved. We can entirely miss it though, because it is just an opportunity. So we have to be diligent and watching. We have to get out there, engage with the zeitgeist, be touched by the peoples, harmlessly infected by life-changing memes, to be a part of the revolution. And it's happening. You can see it. You can feel it. Standing Rock, hearing stories or be telling stories of places like Burning Man, being connected to communities and certain information online, reading about it, being a fly on the wall, listening to podcasts and conversations, knowing that there's an awakening and a revolution coming. It's everywhere. And there's so many fascinating ways of seeing this, like how ayahuasca has become a household name, how many elders are shamelessly getting involved with cannabis in legal states. We are all in the know and kind of like know-it-alls to an extent these days, with endless possibilities, yet still yearning for that depth. So I say we try to find it together. But first, we do need to recognize some of that excess and some of those shadows, because we do not want to get consumed by the shadows of Uranus and Jupiter. And here's a paragraph from a book called Pathways to Wholeness. Ren Butler wrote it. He's been on the show a couple times, and he's just speaking of the shadows of such a contact. As these breakthroughs unfold, people may also have feelings of inflated self-importance, exaggerated freedom, or special privilege, even identifying personally with figures such as Midas, Icarus, Christ, or God. While in everyday life, these emotions might be responded to with censure. In holotropic sessions, sitters just allow the inflationary pockets to emerge and dissipate themselves. So arrogant or exclusionary feelings are soon replaced by those of win-win and shared breakthrough. The premature awakening idea. I'm so special. I saw God. Now what? I think it's back to carrying water, my friend. I do think it's back to making toast. And here is another example of the shadow, which comes from Rob Hand's Planets and Transits book. And he writes, "You will feel the breaking away itself as an enormous relief, a lessening of tension. One writer described this transit as thank the Lord." So this is something, you guys, that we should all be getting quite excited about, and also knowing that it's a big theme of 2017. And for this reason, we must review our lives very carefully to find out what needs to be overthrown and what does not. The danger is that you will overthrow worthwhile things along with the useless. Be careful of this, because it could substantially vitiate any advantage you gain from your new freedom. I've been seeing that a lot. People getting real radical with their visions and their decisions and their relationship to the future. Because it's already an orb. Even though the exactness of this transit is yet to come, we're still feeling it. I want to read this too. Relationships are especially affected by this transit, particularly those that obligate you in some way. A partnership, either marital or business, may be quite difficult to maintain during this time. And to add to the confusion, it is sometimes your partner who wants out. This is an example of a transit experience in projected form. Instead of putting out the energy yourself, you encounter someone who is apparently doing it for you. In this case, do not attempt to hold on to the other person, for that is the surest way to drive him or her away. Give your partner all the freedom he or she needs, for you need it too, although you are not aware of it. It's like that Zen idea of wanting to control a cow. You give it a pasture, not tight quarters in a fence that it feels restricted by. And so these are some of the shadow ideas. We're easing into the concept of what their archetypal dynamic is, that is, what kind of energy that they create together. But let's take a look at each of them individually. Uranus, we can think of as the breakaway, who's in Aries, has been since 2011. I think that this side of the polarity, the opposition, is the price of laying an eye. That is, something that can't be unseen. We have the responsibility of now living with it. Like when we meet aliens and they teach us something special, and we see how it pertains to our life. It changes us forever. We can't unsee that, but also in talking about that with people makes us seem, well, a little bit crazy. It's an idea of mental trauma. We could come up with many different examples of this, but being that it's in Aries, this trauma or this need of breaking away is pretty directly related to the idea of personal freedoms. And as we find out more and more through WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden and the truth of the NSA and what's really going on, not being able to trust anything anymore, the church, the government, nobody but ourselves. And can we even trust ourselves because of programming or the thoughts that might be arising from that holographic strand of DNA within us? Or maybe it's the gut bacteria, or maybe it's something else. But like in a way, we are programmed. And with Uranus being crowned and all, through the eagle's flight, and seeing how we're not as free as we thought, that we are programmed, that many of us have become sheeple, others alienated by skin color, religion, belief, and sex, that none of this is allowed through the eyes of Uranus. Just think back to the beginning when Uranus moved into Aries. It was the exact day that Fukushima happened, but also there was all the unrest in the Arab Spring, the revolution in Egypt, the Occupy movement, all these examples. The moment that Uranus moved into Aries, it was like a powder keg. And so it began. And will be in Aries until 2018, 2019 because of some retrogrades. So with Uranus, or Uranus, however you want to say it, we become aware of the programmer and begin to hack his code. We learn something about ourselves, or we learn some of this code ourselves, creating digital chaos in the process, scrambling the signal, allowing us to break away in our right to individuate, a great word for Uranus, and do some experiments with consciousness and find, hopefully, a vision of Shangri-La. I think Uranus is often, of course, related to the idea of the future, right? And that is absolutely a part of Uranus. But I've been thinking even deeper about just the essence of Uranus as higher mind and deconditioning and trying to figure out, like, is it just future? Because future, of course, as the past, is illusory. And I think here's another idea around it, that it's less about the future and how we will be remembered, but more about remembering what came before us. That through the deprogramming and having the capacity to transcend our situation, we can see 360, but remember those ancestors, those stories that are fading away, the myths, and using their assistance through prayer to help us remember that we're free, that there's no chains or bars around consciousness or truth. By defragging, we get closer and closer to the source of all of this, which is nothing. Or you could call it Buddha nature, that it's found within beginner's mind, but that taintless, that's a way of putting it, untainted mind, the pure mind that is just a koan in and of itself, is part, I think, of what Uranus is trying to get us to remember. And then we can choose consciously what we want to fill our brains with in our whole experience. Now with Jupiter, who's in Libra, this is the breakthroughs, or in some sense, the endless opportunities. As William Blake said, the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. Sometimes. It can also kill you, make you hide and feel shame and guilt, taking away from any potentiality of depth. A favorite amongst justifying addicts, right? I'd rephrase it and say the middle road leads to the palace of true wisdom. Jupiter in Libra, thinking of it as the middle road of understanding not that extreme choice from any pole might not be the best choice. Perhaps at other times when Jupiter is in Aries, it can be so. But now we think of moderation, balance, inspired flight without getting out there too far because, well, we need you. Your good work. We need each other. So don't drift away. Don't blow your circuits so fast. Pay attention to Saturn. Another way of seeing this. And if you are privileged enough to be plagued by endless opportunities, wherever you're living in the world, just don't be a donkey between hay and water, not being able to make up your mind and then starving yourself to death. Make a choice. Stick to it. Let the roots grow deep and the wind speak. There's a grace here with Jupiter, always with Jupiter transits. But when the alignments happen again, Jupiter is the crowning element to the situation. And so to see where it's pointing in your chart, you probably are going to be finding some grace there, but also it's a life hack around being able to say yes to certain opportunities that emerge. I say, grab the hand of that support that is there and leap through the door, which shimmers with gold. If it doesn't open, I don't know, summon Ganesh to crash through this easy obstacle. That's what he's for. He's a version of Jupiter. And this experimentation of consciousness and all these endless opportunities and whatnot, I want to read this little bit from a book I read like before I meditate often. It's called Zen and the Art of Archery. And I'm going to replace every time the word Zen is used with Jupiter. And you'll see how this makes sense. So, by the way, the author of this book is Eugene Herrigel. It's a wonderful little book. Yet the man who is transformed by Jupiter and who has passed through the fire of truth leads far too convincing of a life for it to be overlooked. So it is not asking too much of, or if, driven by a feeling of spiritual affinity and desirous of finding a way to the nameless power which can work such miracles. For the merely curious have no right to demand anything. We expect that the Jupiter adept, at least to describe the way that leads to the goal. No mystic and no student of Jupiter is, at first step, the man he can become through self-perfection. How much has still to be conquered and left behind before he finally lights up the truth? How often is he tormented on the way by the desolate feeling that he is attempting the impossible? And yet this impossible will one day have become possible and even self-evident. Is there not room for the hope, then, that a careful description of this long and difficult road will allow us at least one thing, to ask whether we wish to travel it? To be a student of Jupiter is to go on a journey, my friends. It's why Jupiter rules Sagittarius. Now, whether that's a physical journey or a metaphysical one that's inside of your own experience on a cushion in front of a candle, however it looks, it is a path that is laid out for you, and all you need to do is commit to it, to say, yes, this is it. And I can guarantee you that when you look at your chart and find like where this Jupiter is pointing, it is very specific to a part of your life that is showing up like this. I highly recommend you say yes to some of these opportunities. And an important piece to add before we move on to the next segment is Pluto. So even though Pluto isn't exactly squaring Uranus at the moment, or it doesn't happen all at once, it does still by orb create a T-square. So Pluto's in Capricorn squaring Jupiter and Uranus, Aries, Libra. So what does this mean? What does the Pluto work as a resolution, maybe, to the T-square? I'd call it the true ground of being. It is that depth part that we're all looking for. And to get to it, we need to admit that we've got demons. Everyone's got them. We have shadows. We have work to do. That there is a metaphysical ground that we walk on. And within this hidden landscape, there are treasures of impossible beauty and potential. It requires shamanic means, though. Assistance from plant, planet, or teacher to guide us into the dimension of our programming, our DNA, and show us how to properly tamper with it via sound, frequency, breath, energy, attention. It can be done. If energy goes where attention goes and anything is possible, well, you better gamble on this one with the gods that you can edit your story, because Pluto is this depth and it helps resolve any tension between the two, perhaps showing up as this transformational means that is necessary in any kind of gene splicing, or shall we say, meme splicing. That when Pluto is involved with the two of them, Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto, it's especially intense, like the storming of the Bastille, for example, in 1789, which was the beginning of the French Revolution, as far as I understand it. I think it was a triple conjunction. Or the momentum and the freedom current of the late 60s, a similar thing in 69. That Pluto tends to add a darker hues to the painting, some reds and purples, and delivers the medicine needed for real change. For real change, there has to be death so birth can happen. And birth is traumatic, it's loud, painful, bloody, and beautiful by its end. So this is what we're talking about. Pluto at the tip of the T-square between Jupiter opposing Uranus. I think it's time that we get a little bit more technical in our understanding of this alignment. And by doing so, I'm just going to read off a few dates that you can play with in understanding it. That, for example, the origin point of this particular Jupiter-Uranus cycle was in 2010 and 11. I'll give you the exact dates. June 8th, 2010, that's where it was at 0 Aries, the Aries point. September, is it 18th? At 28 Pisces, that was the retrograde conjunction. And then January 4th, 2011, at 27 Pisces. So it was drifting between the last degrees of the zodiac in the beginning. So being able to find that in your chart and contemplate beginnings of a lot of the ideas that I just brought up, because the conjunction does relate, but it's, of course, the beginning of a cycle. That the difference is that perhaps an idea comes in, an excitement about expanding your understanding of a particular system. I remember during that time, I started learning a lot about fixed stars. I was living in Hawaii then, and I was reading and looking, because I was like on the top of the Big Island, like great stargazing, like working with fixed stars and trying to integrate all of that into my work. And here I am 7 years later, and I still don't use them very much in my work, but under the sky, like when I'm outside and I can see it, like I know a lot more than I ever did before. And I think it's one of the most important things in being an astrologer is not just to be lost within these programs, but to actually get out there under the sky and connect, not just with the stars and the constellations, but the actual planetary cycles as well. But taking it to like that 2010 to 2011 time, and asking some of these questions about endless opportunities, the need for depth, like that location, where you need to be, like what is a way of being that allows you to cultivate a profound understanding of your life, having the capacity to really harness the power of your imagination. Stuff like this. And I remember back in 2010 into that 2011, there was a lot of the scatterling energy in me. I had moved to Hawaii, didn't really connect with a lot of the people there, loved the land, felt isolated. It was strange. Ended up, we left. Back to Florida, a place that I'm not too fond of, even though it's where I came into the world. And a similar feeling of just so much trepidation around actually putting my roots in. And so by the end of it, by that last conjunction, I had moved back to Colorado and finally allowed myself to ease into the situation, to allow my roots to go deeper. And it was indeed the beginning of this new relationship that I had specifically to place. But also I think it really helped my astrology as well. I remember taking the podcast much, much more seriously in the spring of 2011. And so what we're seeing is that as the beginning, the final degrees in the first degree of the zodiac, and then now the opposition, the first exact alignment is December 26th. It's going to happen at 20 degrees Aries in Libra. And then it's going to occur again on March 2nd of 2017. That's at 22. And then on September 27th of 2017 as well. That one is at 27 degrees Libra in Aries. And so just to find these degrees in your chart to understand how the opposition now is a culmination. This coming of the idea of here's the result of maybe what was seeded back in 2010, 2011. And because it's an opposition, often these transits are met through other people, right? We see it in our relating. For example, as the holidays are coming, you might feel that your own intellectual growth, what you know, that you have an advantage over that family member. And it's always met by opposition. There's always debate and argument. I can't believe you voted for Trump. Well, here's a suggestion. Really listen. Don't fight. Be genuinely interested in the opposition and learn from it. That how much do you actually know? I mean, you know what's true for you, but why and what is the point of putting those ideas and memes on another person when you know that your way of trying to nourish that dry desert of that part of their mind is just never going to work? Doesn't work. And so sometimes it's best just to fly above the clouds, hiding those truths and those talons and just listening. That this idea as well of mirror neurons is really interesting when you can open up to a person like that. But being genuinely interested by holding good space, that is an incredible place to be in. And you're reflecting back to a person that might even be considered an enemy or an adversary. All you're reflecting back to them is love in the reflection of whatever they're saying without you getting judgy or reactionary or anything like this. But seeing that mirror neuron in another way is by surrounding yourself with like-minded people, making that big leap of faith, that breakaway, that breakthrough, and getting to where you need to get to. And by surrounding yourself with people that are inspiring, that are spiritually minded, and all this stuff, it begins to help to rewire your brain. Now, it also can turn into an echo chamber like Facebook, but that's another conversation. So those are some of the dates to play with. Important to build context and understanding that, yeah, in a way, I would say one of the big old themes of 2017 is this opposition. So now let's take a look at some important examples of this throughout time. What can we expect with this opposition, right? Well, again, from Cosmos and Psyche, Rick writes, the Jupiter-Uranus complex appears to be associated with the experience of breakthroughs of all kinds, joyful Promethean moments of discovery, sudden ascents, unexpected insights that expand one's world, the aha experience. The history of technological breakthroughs is closely associated to this alignment. The discovery of electromagnetic induction, 1831. The invention of the telegraph, 1844. The invention of the electric light bulb, 1879. The first radio broadcast, 1920. The first film, motion picture, 1927. The first television transmission, 1927. The first internet transmission, 1969. Actually, Werner Herzog did a documentary on this, by the way. It's really cool. It's really good. Highly recommend it. So during these oppositions, things happen in this aha type moment, but it's also electric. It relates to harnessing electricity. For example, in the opposition of 1976, we're in an opposition, right? Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs constructed their first personal computer. Can you believe it, right? So, what's also notable, which makes sense, is aviation, the history of it, and space flight, in which the characteristic Jupiter-Uranus impulse to defy limits, to transcend gravity, to move upward and outward into freedom and expansive space is particularly clearly embodied. What is this? The hot air balloon was invented in 1782. That's part of it. The moon landing was in 1969, and then it runs off here. It's a screenshot I'm looking at. But you're getting the idea. It's interesting, right? The conjunction of 1540 between the two of them was when Copernicus published his heliocentric theory. In 1609, Galileo and Kepler confirmed it. In 1775 and 1776, the American Revolution happened. 14 years later, the storming of the Bastille and the French Revolution that spread all throughout the world. 1858 was Darwin and the Origin of Species. The interpretation of dreams in 1900, or was it the interpretation of memes? And quantum theory and quantum mechanics as well happened in 1900, that same year of the conjunction. Something that I'm still befuddled by. The conjunction of 1927, and you might be asking, why is he talking about the conjunctions? Again, they're the axial alignments, so conjunction, opposition, when you're looking at history, also squares at times as well you can play around with. But this is a quicker cycle, it's 14 years, so the conjunction and the opposition is what we're focusing on here. But in 27, the Big Bang Theory, Bohr and Heisenberg kind of solidify a lot of the ideas around quantum mechanics. Peak experiences with Maslow, all of these ideas of an expanding mind and understanding of what in the world is going on, and these ideas like evolution via Darwin, the Big Bang, we assume them to be true. And they've had great impact on our world, even heliocentric theory. But are they true? The Big Bang, I can't pull it from my head, but Terence McKenna often said, if you can believe in the Big Bang, you can believe in anything, people. That idea. I forget exactly how he says it, but, right? What if the Earth is flat? Then that really fucks up Copernicus and everything that they came up with, right? So these are ideas, they're memes, they're something that happens when Jupiter and Uranus come together, that an idea goes viral and it catches on and it changes our relationship to the world and how we understand our place in the cosmos. But unless it is universal truth, it will always fade away and go. It's one of the ideas around this. In 1969, you have the moon landing, Woodstock, the Summer of Love. Think of all the specialness of that year, the timeless albums. There was perfection to this around then. The first internet transmission, like mentioned. And the examples just go on and on. I think you're getting the idea. And so now, like at least in my own sphere, like where do I find this inspiration and how I see certain individuals and their ideas really assisting in this pushing of all the boundaries and even in a way transcending what is even possible. Well, this guy Martin Shaw that I keep referencing in all the recent podcasts, I think that his relationship to myth and storytelling and place is an incredibly important idea. And it's not about going back, but it is about remembering so that we can move forward with more grace. Someone similar that I think is just as important is Martin Prechtel, and like bringing this ancient shamanic wisdom into the West from Guatemala. Wim Hof. It's not rocket science in the sense that breathing, it makes you feel good, but in Wim's work, the inner fire work, and all the science that he has backing it up, it shows that through the mind and the breath, the autonomic nervous system can be controlled. And the implications of that are out of this world. So I think he is on the list. And of course, the exponentiation, Moore's law with computers, that popularity of Westworld and artificial intelligence waking up, like these are some of the ideas that are happening, being able to grow legs or grow body parts and stuff like this. Like we know some of this, the rise of Superman, Stephen Kotler's work on flow states, Tools of Titans, Tim Ferriss's stuff, just podcasts, these conversations, the feeling of revolution in the air. When information is available, like it is on the internet in so many countries, and you have the self-discipline to find the right information for your own awakening, there's nothing that is stopping it. The endless opportunities that are there on a blank Google page. Where do I begin? Well, my offering is that this depth and this true change can only happen through metaphysical means. That yes, it is a perfect time for a quantum leap in consciousness, but where are we leaping? It's always good to have a vision and to talk about it. And so good conversation, this isn't opposition after all, should compost concepts that don't assist in this grace and in this awakening, and should be rebirthed into something new, Pluto. But how can we do that if in conversation we're always triggered all the time thinking that we're right, that the right and the wrong, the left and the right, the opposition, it doesn't work for the idea of good conversation, composting concepts to be entertaining what is actually being reflected back at us. For example, ideologies can be very dangerous, right? They can even be thought of as parasites that exist on universal archetypes. These low-res ideas like universal sin and forcing people to use the right gender pronouns, like, oh my goodness, like there's a wonderful podcast I highly recommend listening to with Rogan and this guy Jordan, I think Stevenson, and he's a professor at the University of Toronto, and he, of course, is controversial, but he makes so many good points. And I think he's the one that talks about this low-res, high-res thinking. And like the high-res thinking, which would be a Uranian idea, is allowing in the concepts that are universally true. There's no parasite upon them. That is, we are love. We are connected. We are infinite. We are, everything is relative. And so with all these ideas, how about like living in a simulation? Like the probability of that, a lot of people believe in it. go ahead, believe in it, as long as you know that you're the programmer and you're not programmed, that if it doesn't steal your autonomy, then great, as long as it works. That's the whole idea. As long as it works and it continues your evolving. Or ideas of, are we just in a dream, dreaming within a dream, waking life, like a butterfly doing so? It really does truly stretch the imagination to imagine such an idea, a dream or a simulation, that the world is not as it seems, that it perhaps is closer to the Matrix. Who knows, right? We don't know enough to worry. But one thing I can say that we haven't talked about yet that is pretty specific to Jupiter and Uranus, because the two of them, when they come together, relate to this idea of expanding consciousness, right? So how about altered states? Not just drugs and plants, but through breath and deprivation and floating and ordeal like Vision Quest, no food, no water, all of that. All creatures crave it. It's even called the fourth drive, that history shows people have always used intoxicants. In every age, in every part of the world, people have pursued intoxication with plants, alcohol, and other mind-altering substances. In fact, this behavior has so much force and persistence, it functions like a drive for food, sleep, and sex. The fourth drive, as psychopharmacologist Ronald Siegel talks about. It's a part of our biology. And there's this irrepressible demand for intoxicating substances. And this does not show itself only to human beings. It's also true in animals. For example, baboons and their relationship to iboga, dolphins and pufferfish sharing the toxin, which is so deadly it's worse than the venom of a black widow. But for some reason, dolphins get off on it. There's a hilarious video of a lot of these that I'm about to mention on YouTube. You can just go down a little portal, like dogs and psychedelic mushrooms, elephants and getting drunk from the marula trees, fermented fruit and bog water. Birds love ganja seeds. Jaguars drink, like they chew on ayahuasca leaves and then get all nappy and weird and wild-eyed in the jungle. Lemurs get high off of millipedes. Monkeys dig alcohol. Horses seek out loco weed. The reindeer eat Amanita muscaria. Wallabies ravage opium poppy fields. I mean, the list. Animals love it. People love it. Then why can you go to prison for the rest of your life for the amount of DMT that is found in an orange, for example? So, why then again are the good ones, the ones with very deep therapeutic potential, are all Schedule 1, like psilocybin, MDMA, DMT, etc. And then Big Pharma gets to concoct these zombie pills in the lab and destroy lives. It's one of the great paradoxes of our age. And recently this happened, like for so many people that are trying to get off of opioids, benzos, heroin, even alcohol, have found kratom, which is a plant from Southeast Asia, to be incredibly helpful in working with the weaning off process. It's not an opioid in itself, but it does have an effect of withdrawals and cravings and all of this. And it was about to go Schedule 1 on December 1st, but because of these comments on this government website and all these signatures that were given, like kratom did not go Schedule 1, which basically means no medicinal value whatsoever. And so no medicinal value to cannabis on that level, on the federal. No medicinal value to psilocybin mushrooms, to ayahuasca, to MDMA, to any of this. It is one of the great paradoxes of our age. And it's amazing that there's a lot of victories happening. For example, with MDMA and its uses with PTSD, like MAPS, is stage 2 or 3 in their studies of actually making it legal off Schedule 1 so therapists can use it with their clients. It'll take longer for the psilocybin, but still there has been studies at like Johns Hopkins and other places showing the potential of this too, with addiction, with depression, with working with stage 4 cancer, all this stuff. It just elates. And that's the whole point of certain plants, that they bring us in contact, not with just their light because they hold it, but with truth, with universal truth, with a way of seeing deep into our own psychology, which is the Pluto side of this equation, and getting on with it. Now, I'm not saying it's the answer. There is no the answer, just one magic bullet, of course. But if you haven't, if you don't know, and if you're called to, I'd say give the 4th drive a go and take a trip into the depth of your soul and see the endless opportunities flash before your eyes, seeing that the only path worthwhile is one with heart in it, in depth. And so any way that is healthy to you to alter your consciousness is, of course, always available for the most part, depending on where you're at on the planet. But there are transits like this one with Jupiter and Uranus that has so much to do with assisting and supporting gracefully this new way of thinking. Okay, let's now take a look at chart examples. That is, people born with the Jupiter-Uranus opposition. Sparks of genius, visionaries, those before their time, revolutionaries, people who think outside the box or the cube. It's not a think. It's static eccentricity to the mainstream. In a way, pure genius in the eyes of us programmers. They've got crazy ideas, interesting approaches, yet when accepted, whether it's in their time or after, changes everything, expanding our understanding of the cosmos. So the first example that I can offer is of Nick Drake. Whether you know about him or not, he's an amazing singer-songwriter that was not received that well during his time. It took his premature Forever 27 death and then some time for it to catch on, but his guitar arrangements, his lyrics, just the feeling of his music is, I would say, yes, a Jupiter-Uranus thing. And for him, he's a Gemini. That Uranus is in Gemini, conjunct his sun, and that's the way in which it shows up. Never met the guy, but I would consider him an eccentric. I would call him a musical genius, and also I've had some pretty altering moments in listening to his music, especially the album 5 Leaves Left. We also have Noah, co-host of the show, one of them at least. And Noah, I would say a lot of the similar things with his music, like in a time when, gosh, there's just so many singer-songwriters and so much of it sounds the same. And I remember the first time I listened to Noah's music, there was something unique about it. And then it just grew on me. I'm a big fan of Ghost Lights. Noah knows this. And I can't wait for his new album to come out either. But Noah's got it, born in 89. Uranus conjunct both Neptune and Saturn, opposing Jupiter. A perfect one that just makes sense to all we've talked about is Einstein. Einstein has this opposition, Uranus and Virgo, 3rd house, ideas, and Jupiter, depending on the house system you use, but I use whole, so it is found in the 8th house. And Aquarius. Now, what's curious is that his north node's also in Aquarius, so this Uranus rules his north node. It facilitates, quote-unquote, destiny. He's also a Pisces with the NC in Pisces. Like, what is it that he's to gift to the world, right? Well, Jupiter rules that. So the ruler of his sun and MC and the ruler of the north node come into an alignment. And it's a phrase like Einstein, like who you think, yeah, Einstein or whatever, but like his ideas created an unstoppable intellectual chain reaction, an avalanche of pulsing, chattering neurons and memes that will ring for eternity. In a way, the crowned king who redefined gravity in space and time. It's a fascinating example of it. We have Marco Polo, who came up in the Jupiter-Sun show because, well, he has Jupiter conjunct the Sun, and it opposes Uranus at 0 degrees Aries. Jupiter rules his south node, which is in Sagittarius, this adventurous spirit who finds himself in the midst of the Mongol Empire with Kublai Khan and gets to experience all this stuff in the Far East and then actually make it back to Italy and write a book about it. What is it? The Travels of Marco Polo or something like this. Expanding one's understanding, a whole culture's understanding of the world by being able to infiltrate something that seems impossible. A cultural education, if you will. Libra. I have this friend whose dad was inducted into the Consumer Electronics Hall of Fame next to Steve Jobs for, I think, if I understand it correctly, he was the first person in the US to sell compact discs, and just like his business model as well for this audio video company that he has based here in Colorado. And a very Uranian character, and he's got Uranus conjunct the MC, Venus, and Mercury all in Gemini, opposing Jupiter and Sag. Like really into ham radio, really into electronics, a progressive thinker in so many ways, and so there you have how that can show up. Like we saw in those examples throughout time of electromagnetic energy, the telegraph, television broadcast, radio, the internet, it all shows up. But when people have it in their chart, there is a disposition for understanding it and living close to it. As you see in the case with Brian Eno, who is, if you don't know who Brian Eno is, he's best known for his pioneering work in ambient and electronic music, but also doesn't really consider himself a musician, calls himself a non-musician. But he's known for his theory over practice and all these unique recording techniques and conceptual approaches to contemporary music. He's been described as one of popular music's most influential and innovative figures. So the influential part would be Jupiter, the innovation part would be Uranus, and he's got Uranus in Gemini. So these are all people born in the late 40s that have the Uranus Gemini opposite Jupiter in Sagittarius, 3rd to 9th house. You have Bukowski, who has Jupiter conjunct the Sun in Leo, opposite Uranus in Pisces. So it's out of sign, but still within orb as far as the alignment is concerned. And Bukowski is a curious example in that, like, he was such a controversial character that the FBI actually kept a file on him because of his column called The Dirty Old Man. And I think that Bukowski's secret appeal is how he combines like the confessional poet's promise of intimacy with this larger than life, a plume of Pulp Fiction hero or something like this. I mean, very prolific poetry and prose, something that appealed to the normal layman, but also had, of course, this poetic muse to it. I found out about Bukowski when I was at Naropa, and a lot of the writers that were in the Kerouac school were very deeply influenced by Bukowski and his approach to writing, and also, of course, the drinking gets involved with that a little bit. But anyhow, William Butler Yeats has Jupiter and Sag opposing both Sun and Uranus in Gemini. So this is a big one in the sense that Yeats was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature for his always inspired poetry. which in a highly artistic form gives expression to the spirit of a whole nation. As an example of this, now that my ladder is gone, I must lie down where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. But a cultural hero, an Irishman that becomes a voice of a nation and gives these endless opportunities of cultural pride, but also understanding of the zeitgeist of that time as well. MC Hammer, my best example yet, who has Uranus on the North Node in Leo, a bit of a stretch, but and then Jupiter in Pisces in opposition. I don't really know much about MC Hammer except his rapid rise to fame, which is an idea of how Uranus and Jupiter can work. And you can't touch this. Too legit to quit. You can't touch this. It's too fast. It's too meta. It's too electric. It's too big. It's amazing. MC Hammer's the best example we've got so far. Oh my goodness. There's Steve Irwin, Crikey, the crocodile hunter, who has it, and I think that his work with animals and conservation and just his entertaining way of displaying such relationships to dangerous animals and whatnot is a very curious example of this. That Jupiter's on his sun in Aquarius, and then Uranus is in Leo. That opposition, and I looked at his death, like, because of his strange way of dying, and it was September 4th, 2006, when he was pierced in the chest by a stingray while filming this documentary film. And from what I know about stingrays, they're one of the most gentle creatures of the sea, and I didn't know that stingrays attacked like that. I think that it was an accident. But when I looked at the transits, what's curious is that Saturn on that day was conjunct his North Node, which is in Leo, and then Venus was on his Uranus. And so the two rulers of Aquarius, which is the ruler of his South Node, this karmic display of how things can play out sometimes, were active in two different fronts. You know, the traditional and the modern ruler of Aquarius, Saturn, Uranus, both being, it was to the degree. And so that's something to sit over when you study death charts and how all that kind of stuff works. You have Roger Maris. I know about this guy because I used to play baseball, but also I had a stint of growing up in Fargo, North Dakota, which is where he's from. And Roger Maris has this opposition on the angles, MCIC. That's a bit out of order, but, you know, close enough. And what is he known for but breaking Babe Ruth's home run record by getting 60 plus home runs in a year? Like the idea of breaking records and making records, like the Guinness Book of World Records, stuff like this, like I think is something that stretches the imagination of what's possible in us human beings. We have Emma Watson, Hermione. Without her brains in the Harry Potter story, how would they have ever succeeded over Voldemort? Like that intelligence that she offers the quartet, the little group, is that, of course, she's not Hermione. I don't know her as a person, but she's also an activist, and that's something that Uranus can awaken in a person. You have Haile Selassie, Yesai, the Lion of Zion, who I found this curious, that his sun's at 0 degrees Leo on the MC. I think that's so perfect to be the Rasta Kingman of Rastafarianism. But also, I don't know too much about him, but he was a messianic figure who led, or was said to lead, a future, a goal of golden age and eternal peace, righteousness, and prosperity. And so in the 30s in Jamaica, the Rastafari movement started, and he was their Messiah, their savior, the King of Egypt, and died at 83, just 1 year before the Uranus cycle completed. So at 84 is when the Uranus return occurs. So that would have been activating the opposition in his chart. And then we have Peter the Great. I remember this character from a Western Civ class in high school, one of the only things I remember from that class, because he seemed like a really interesting character. He was the one that led a cultural revolution in Russia, and a lot of it had to do with his travels all throughout Europe during the Enlightenment, bringing back science and Western thought and everything that was just kind of percolating throughout Europe at the time. And his impact was huge on all the institutions in Russia. And this is Peter the Great. He's got it Jupiter on the south node, Uranus on the north node. So it's very much a part of his personal mythology and what he's destined or was destined to do. Anthony Kiedis, what happens when you take hip hop and funk and you're white and you put it all together? Well, you get the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and also, I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, I think that the Red Hot Chili Peppers helped to carve out a niche for a lot of different music and experimentation with sound. And he's got it from the 12th to the 6th house. So Uranus is in Virgo in the 12th house, this idea of the collective and fame and like his unique and contribution through his strange lyricism. And then Jupiter down in the 6th house in Pisces, conjunct Chiron. And those are the charts, examples at least, that I have for you guys. And I hope it makes sense. I mean, of course, I could go deeper into all of those charts, but I just wanted to illustrate some of the ideas of the visionary, of the radical, the revolutionary, those who bring good ideas into an old stagnant system and watch it all ignite and spread and affect millions of people. Endless examples, though. There's many more I had to choose not to bring up, but those were the keepers. And I hope it helps in understanding this planetary pair a little bit more. And as far as the opposition that's happening in the sky, choose the high road, the eagle's path, my friend. Circulate that territory that you sleep in. Get your own ideas. Question all of the ideas that are popping around in your head. Get close to other ideas, those good ones that can help edit your programming, awakening the dormant DNA inside of you. And get in stride with the current of this big bang and exponential evolution that's happening in the year 2016. The end of 2016. If those ideas are even true. Big bang and all that. This all could be a simulation. We don't know. We just don't know. Well, all right, my friends, that was the show. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something about Jupiter and Uranus that you didn't already know, about their alignments, both the conjunctions and the oppositions, and I hope that there is a steady excitement in your heart about what's to come. Again, to support the show, go to iTunes on your computer in the store, Exploring Astrology, leave some stars, leave a review. It does wonders for the podcast, and also the main way of supporting the show is through Patreon. So go to patreon.com/exploringastrology, and you can choose the tier at which you donate every month, and those, of course, all have different gifts involved within them. At the $10 tier, I forgot to mention this in the beginning, is the CIA raffle. I feel bad about not mentioning it at the beginning, but you also, not just the class that you get by contributing $10 a month, but also are submitted to the CIA raffle, which will give you a year's membership with the Cosmic Intelligence Agency. Heck of a deal. So you can also go to my site, holstoheavens.com, and click on any of the Patreon buttons, and it will take you there. I thank you ahead of time for becoming a fellow patron to the show. Also, the apprenticeship is going to be starting in the second week of January. If you were on the wait list and you haven't responded yet, to confirm your spot, we still have about 10 people to fill the spots. We're going to have around 5 people per class Monday through Friday. We're going to have morning classes for all of you that are in Europe and Australia, and there'll be evening classes for everyone here that's in the States. You can go to my site, to the offerings and the apprenticeship page. You can look at the syllabus, read a little bit about it. If you are serious and you're curious, please email me at cosmonosis@gmail.com. You can also Facebook me as well to ask about any further questions about what it means to be a part of the apprenticeship and to be certified at the end of it, hopefully, as a competent professional astrologer. And the parlor this month is going to be on the 18th, which is next Sunday, and the class, which is on the nodes of the moon, is going to be on the 2nd of January. These are both Sundays, and so if you're not checking your Patreon messages and you're curious about when these are going to be held, I'm going to create events for them tomorrow, so it's going to happen soon. And we're also brought to you by Solar Fire. Get yourself a Christmas present to expand your consciousness around your relationship to astrology. It's a very real situation. It's an incredibly amazing astrology program. Just use promo code SOMA on their site. You click on it on my store, then it brings you to their site, and you use promo code SOMA, you get 15% off. And also, Liam's Chocolate, drinkcococo.com. Go and peruse his amazing chocolate. See what Jupiter and Uranus are drinking. It is called the drink of the gods for a reason. And that, my friends, is all the shop that I have to offer. Now, one final thing, I forgot to mention it, but I think it's appropriate to mention it now, that there was another extraordinary occasion in the recent past that involved the multi-planet convergence coinciding with the Jupiter-Uranus cycle. In this instance, it was Neptune that was involved. This was the last Jupiter-Uranus opposition of the 20th century, and it took place precisely during the astonishing 14-month period from June of '89 to July of 1990. That brought the unexpected wave of demonstrations for freedom by hundreds of thousands of people all across Eastern Europe, precipitating the collapse of communism throughout the continent, the fall of the Iron Curtain. So building on decades of courageous dissident acts and underground emancipatory movements, the sudden wave of liberation took place within weeks, beginning in Poland and the Baltic states and rapidly spreading throughout East Germany. And then the wall came down. But it was only a fantasy. The wall was too high. As you can see, no matter how hard he tried, he could not break free, and the worms ate into his brain. You guys, I'm going to leave you with Hey You by Pink Floyd. It's so appropriate to everything that we talked about. If you like the music that I use on the show, in the background there was Dirt Wire, a song called Vesper. Of course, Pink Floyd, you know them. And I have a Spotify playlist on Spotify called Exploring Astrology. So if you want to subscribe to that playlist and listen to all the music that I've ever used on the podcast, you can do it. It's free. Just get on it on Spotify. And so thank you so much for listening, my friends. Be well, be kind, and I will talk with you next with Shireen, I believe. I think that's my next podcast guest. So I'm excited about that. And here is the amazing Pink Floyd with Hey You. Thank you again for listening to the podcast. Sorry I wasn't able to share the song. YouTube is a bit more strict than the podcast apps. So if you'd like to listen to the whole show, go over to Spotify, the podcast app, SoundCloud, or really wherever podcasts are found. This is Tree Theater. Ciao.